I'd like to call to order the Thursday, January 5th, 2017 Watertown Board of Adjustment meeting. Roll call, please.
Dolly?
Here.
Arnold?
Here.
McGuire? Here. Schreiber?
Here.
Stonebarger? Here. Hanson? Absent. Stein?
Here.
And Mr. Elberson is absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the December 8th minutes. Could I get a motion in a second?
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Mr. McGuire.
Second.
Second by Mr. Stonebarger. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 2 on the agenda is applicant Jeremiah Grandguard, permit number 17157, seeking a variance for a separate structure at 594 North Lake Drive.
Thank you. Application was submitted requesting to alter, re-roof, and enlarge and raise an existing non-conforming 672 square foot, 24 by 28 unattached garage located on a 36,770 square foot parcel in the R1 Single Family Residential District. Applicant seeks variance relief to allow said non-conforming structure to remain in its current location, setting as close to 5 feet from the easterly property line where 9 feet is required and 1 feet northerly from where the 20-foot setback is required. What this is all getting down to is the existing garage, you can kind of see it right there. And he basically sits 1 foot from the west and 5 foot from the north. It's an existing garage. It has a low ceiling in it, 7 or 8 foot. He wasn't able to put his vehicles in anymore. So all he's requesting to do is take the roof off, build it up to 10'2", which is our standard allowed detached garage height, and put the roof back on. I was contacted by one adjacent neighbor, Mr. Hillmore, who lives over here, and he said he had no issues with the project, and that's all we've heard from. So.
Thank you. I'll open the public hearing if anyone's here to speak on behalf or against the permit. And Ken, the footprint isn't...
is not able to be here today,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
And the footprint isn't changing.
No.
It's just the height, and the height is still within our code.
Yep, the height is still within the code.
Okay.
So.
Seeing no one's here to speak in the public hearing, I'll close the public hearing, ask for a motion and a second for discussion. Motion by Mr. Arnold, second by Mr. Dolly. Any discussion, any questions on it? Nothing on the left, nothing on the right. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Any old business, Ken?
Not for me.
New business?
Not for me.
Never mind. Need a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mr. Stein, second by Mr. McGuire. All in favor say aye. Opposed, motion carries.
They're skewing my vision a little bit.
You want to try mine?
You ready, Brandy?
I'm ready, Pat.
Thank you, Brandy. I'd like to call to order the Watertown City Plan Commission for Thursday, January 5th, 2017. Could I get a roll call?
Dolly?
Here.
Arnold? McGuire?
Here.
Schreiber?
Here.
Stonebarger?
Here.
Stein?
Here.
And Hanson and Albertson are absent.
Thank you. First item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Could I get a motion in a second?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Stonebarger, second by Mr. Stein. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Second item is the approval of the minutes from the November 10th, 2016 meeting. Need a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. McGuire, second by Mr. Stonebarger. All in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Third item is the ordinance amendment to the Watertown zoning ordinance regarding home occupations. Justin, you can take this.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I bring before you today a concept that was originally articulated by Mayor Thorson, and as soon as he brought up the concept, I thought right away it makes complete sense. And in doing some just basic research at the outset, came to find that what's being proposed here today exists in a substantial form with our Matthews model ordinances. So other jurisdictions have adopted similar language, really to account for two themes, two qualities. The first being the evolving nature of the workplace in our country, the fact that more and more individuals are telecommuting, and so potentially more and more individuals can fall under our Chapter 2170 permitting process on home occupations. And the concern really was a practical one. Should they need to have these permits or seek these permits before the Board of Adjustment in order to operate as a telecommuting employee? Or, for that matter, what about those businesses that are actually conducted out of the home that do not have any discernible impact upon the neighborhood? The second thrust, really, then, of this proposal is that the home occupation concern match with zoning concerns more broadly. And obviously, as you know, zoning is put in place as a way to control outlandish uses from being put into neighborhoods where that could damage the property values of those there who have an expectation of being able to live quietly, being able to live without a lot of traffic, being able to live without large, bright signs and the like. So what this amendment seeks to do is create a second or a third section which specifies what will not be considered home occupations, and thus what types of employment or home-based businesses would not need to receive a permit. And I don't know if I see that Mayor Thorson is here. If the mayor would like to make a few comments on this.
No, not really, Justin. I was just trying to get it up on the board so everybody has a chance to see what you're talking about. But it did come up, guys, where there's so many people that are doing their business at home, whether it be like First Premier folks, they're doing a lot of their business at home. Just a lot of internet work that should be easily handled by Kenny out of the office rather than coming and asking you guys for help if, to make a decision, especially if there's no traffic going to be impeded up there or anything like that. So that's why we just thought we needed to update this particular ordinance.
One final item I would add is that, and I think I make reference to it in the memorandum here, that there is an internal practice within our building, with our building official and with others on second floor, where individuals might inquire about whether or not home occupations apply to them, whether or not they need to get a permit, and the building official has done a great job of basically taking these concepts and saying, well, it's basically what's proposed to be in 217003 and saying, now you don't need to come before the board because you have no discernible impact upon your community.
So, Justin, what Ken's doing now, it's a pass-fail. You need it or you don't. He's not charging them. It's a conditional use to have the home occupation, correct?
Yeah, it is a conditional use, and you have to pay and go through all the stuff. And we've kind of had that farmer truck driver type thing in the past where we said, if the farmer's just in his office doing his own home business and stuff, we're not going to make him run through the thing, or a truck driver. But just now, like you said, there's so many of these home-based businesses that are going beyond that kind of falling out of the realm. And this is just going to quantify that it's okay what we're doing.
And those, say a daycare, a saw sharpening place,
They'll all see coming back.
They have to come back to us because what's triggering the home occupation, in your opinion, is in the ordinance. I understand if some gal is making calls from home, collections, whatever it is, we don't require them to have a conditional use for a home occupation versus a daycare.
Correct. But now we're just kind of quantifying it.
We're not charging. We don't charge the daycares. They just have the conditional use.
Oh, the daycares get charged too. No, they got to pay the $140.
It's $100 processing.
One time?
Yeah.
So they pay to have that conditional use to come before us to be granted a conditional use,
Yep.
whereas now these people that are working at home, they're not subject to that.
Correct.
So, yeah, like Ken suggested, really all this is doing is taking an internal process, an internal policy, and making it clear to the public in ordinance.
And the trigger where you say they have to come before us is if there's something structural, if they're using a portion of the home, if they're using any signage, what's the trigger, in your opinion, that
All those
requires
things can
them to
be
come
that,
to
but
us?
basically we're looking for some kind of impact on the neighborhood. If, you're going to have a bunch of cars coming to you, if they're delivering packages all the time, or you're going to have customers coming back and forth to the door all the time, those things that are going to have some kind of
Impact to the neighborhood,
and the
is
neighborhood,
what
if
you
that-
look at.
If in our mind that we think it's going to cause, no impact, but, a slight impact or more, then we want to get the buy-in from the rest of the council and the neighbors and let them all know, okay, this is what's proposed to go there. If you're not even going to know it's going to be there if I don't tell you, then we're not going to make you come through the process.
Okay. With that, I'll open the public hearing if anyone has anything to say in regard to the ordinance adoption. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Need a motion and a second for Resolution 2016-34 for discussion.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Stein, second by Mr. McGuire. Any other discussion, any questions anyone has on that? It's more of impact to the neighborhood is what it is. And
Absolutely.
it gives you some clarification so you're not riding cowboy out there and
Absolutely. I'm not making people go through a 2-month process. It's going to be an automatic yes anyway.
okay. All right, thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a vote. All in favor say aye. Opposed, motion carries. Any old business, Brittany?
No.
New business, A, hospitality addition concept plan for discussion.
Yep. And I can invite Mr. Volkerts up right away if you want. So between Shane, Ken, and myself, we've been working with Mr. Bill Volkerts in developing his hospitality addition. But before going forward with plans, he wanted some discussion from the Plan Commission. So the area distinguished by proposed Lot 1 on the concept plan would have to be annexed and zoned, which is that area. Mr. Folkerts would also be required to ask for a variance on the setback along the proposed 35th Street Southeast, which is that road there, and this is where he'd run into that setback issue because that would become a front if a public street would be coming along there. Which in the C3 zoning district requires a 40-foot front setback. Also, the design review team acknowledges that the adjacent development has a 60-foot right-of-way, which makes it comfortable, which we'd feel comfortable extending north. But when it came to this proposed, I don't even know what that street is. 7th Ave. That we would hope that would be a 66-foot right-of-way. But that is another thing that Mr. Folkerts would like to discuss because he would like to keep it a consistent 60-foot. And I think with that, we can...
Procedurally, would he need a variance now on that building, or by doing this, we now make it a non-compliant building? Does he need the variance now, or does he need the variance at the time of his next building permit on that property?
He would need it before because...
No.
Because what we're doing
we're
is
gonna
by
put
putting the
this-
road there, we've now made that non-compliant due to the front yard setback.
Right.
So legally, we just have to be advised that when the road goes through, we're making a non-compliant lot there.
Right, so it's basically just going to be a consideration that you're going to have at the time of plating. And true, he would not have to come and get a variance until he wanted to do. It now makes his building non-conforming, so any improvement he makes, he'd have to go through that.
And that's more, so he would understand that down the road, he might have to come before a variance and re-explain to a different group that we put a road through there and made our lot non-compliant.
I think what Bill is really looking for is comments from you folks. When you look at this part of town, are you comfortable with 60 foot? I would think you would be, in my opinion, but There's really nothing that I see is going to happen further north of this particular building, but I think, Bill, if that's not, is that kind of what you're looking for? It's just a little bit of comfort from the board if you move forward, that you kind of, they understand what you're after and what you're doing, and we don't run up against a buzzsaw at some particular time.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to be here, because I want to discuss it before I start getting all the wheels in motion, because obviously we're going to be back here talking to you very soon. And we've talked to a number of people in the city and in the utilities, so we, hopefully we got everybody kind of lined up in that chute, ready to go. And the purpose was to discuss here with the things that we're going to have to do. One is the variance, we know that, and we've talked to Ken about that, so that's pretty clear. Second, then the streets themselves. What do we have to put down? Because we're going to replat that whole area now based on what we're thinking we're going to do. So that's coming before you, and so there's a lot of things that are going to be happening here very soon, and so this is a start. We want to know if we're on the right track, or if we're going to run into, like you say, thank you, Mayor, a buzzsaw.
And we normally use a 66-foot right-of-way, but in this case, I talked to Shane earlier in the day, we already have 60-foot right-of-ways leading up to this. The streets will still be consistent with the rest of the streets?
Well, no, I'll say it. The right-of-way in the adjacent subdivision is 60 feet, and we recognize that. So normally we request 66 foot. He probably has a plan that can accommodate the 60-foot right-of-way. The street widths here are a little bit narrower than we normally would see in a commercial district, but in our discussions through the design review team, we would be fine with this street widths that he's proposing, as long as he's accommodated all of his off-street parking, which he has a plan that does that. We wouldn't allow parking on the street in this district with the 60-foot right-of-way and the street width that he's proposing.
And that's consistent with what we've done in the past, is if that's a narrower street, we
street,
we limit the parking on that street then.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Bill, on that Quality Inn and Suites where you had a side yard setback that now, because of the road, it's a front yard setback, and you were compliant, now your lot. What faces that street? There's any parking over there? There's really not a lot of ingress and egress on that side, is there?
No,
So
it wouldn't be.
Even though it's now a front yard, it's still used as a side yard.
Oh, yes,
Normally.
very much so. We have controls on that door, so, therefore, it's not just anybody gonna be walking in and out of there.
Yeah.
For security purposes, that people still have to come in the front door, or they have a key card to come in if they are a registered guest with us, so.
And we wouldn't, as we spoke earlier, we wouldn't be requiring you to come back for a variance at this time. It would be down the road someday if there was a footprint change or a building permit required on that building.
My understanding is we have to have a variance. Is that?
You wouldn't have to have it, like you said, unless you come back, unless you just want to clarify it and take it off the books and make it clean and right away.
The only advantage of doing that would be you're doing it before the body that did this, rather than coming back 20 years from now when ownership has changed and
Yep.
they want to change the footprint, and it's a different
Pat,
mindset.
I'll add a comment to that. Basically, the reason we talked about a variance or not a variance is that the only other way for him to accommodate that and create a compliant 40-foot setback would be to move 35th Street to the west. And he has enough room to potentially do that, but it compromises his fit of his plan for what could go into that proposed Lot 4. So we just wanted to make sure that everybody recognizes as the plat would come forward, or the plan, that we did have that discussion on the 20-foot versus the 40-foot setback, and that's what really impacts what he's doing, and that's why he's before you today, is to make sure that you all know that we as staff had that conversation. But we also, as staff, recognize that we don't vote, that it's the planning commission and ultimately the council that carries the vote. So we wanted to make sure that that conversation was had here for you folks in your consideration on anything that comes forward out of this. And we just wanted to be clear with that. I don't want you to have any surprises. I don't want Mr. Folkers to have any surprises. And that's why we're here having this conversation at this level.
In his concept plan, he conforms with all off-street parking.
Yes.
That was a bit no concern. I don't have any other questions. You guys have any questions? Questions, concerns on the left? Right? Anything else you want to discuss on it? Yeah, it's just general discussion as to it. Yeah, I think the areas where that variance we talked about, the 60 versus 66, and the parking limitations that might be on a narrower road, and as long as everybody's on the same sheet of music there, I think we're probably okay.
So then the next plan commission meeting, that's where he'll bring the annexation, zoning, and the preliminary plan before you.
Sounds good. Zoning C3.
Correct.
Yeah, that would make sense out there.
I think that's consistent, right? That's what we've been talking
Yep.
about.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
right.
it's not me, it's, Scott's gonna be doing all the work, so that's who you're gonna see at the next one.
Right.
He's the one that's got the, the bubble out there, so he knows what's going on for layout and where the pins are gonna go next spring.
Yeah,
It's
so.
a little hard to put pins in today.
Yeah, so we anticipate that they'll come forward, whether it's the next meeting or the meeting after that, with the petition to annex the portion that's in the county and to zone that. We'll get that on track, and then at some point too, they'll come forward with the preliminary plan and plat with the remainder of the work. So just want to make sure that everybody was comfortable with some of the minor concessions that.
Sounds good. It's nice to see in advance like that. So if we do
Absolutely.
have something, we can kind of hash through it before
Abs-
we get too far into the process.
Make a messy intersection.
Correct, but we needed to acknowledge that it's slightly different than what we're used to.
Right.
But we wanted to make sure that you had full disclosure and knowledge of the conversations that have been had. So.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Next item, Brittany, was increased maximum sidewall height in the RG residential garage district.
Before you leave, Bill, I'd just like to, I just want to say thanks for getting in front of this and you putting the dollars into the community like that. It's going to be a great project when you're done out here. And I know you have more and more ideas to happen out there.
Yep, there's gonna be more out there, right.
Thanks,
So,
Bill.
And thank you, and thank the staff for the work with us, and, it's a process. It's a give and take, but I think we've got something that makes a lot of sense, and it's gonna look nice out there. It's gonna be appropriate for the area, so, thank you.
Thank you.
You don't need me anymore.
You're good to go.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you all.
Okay. Then we have the next discussion item of the increasing the sidewall for the residential garage district. And the background to this discussion was the idea of an increased maximum sidewall height was brought to staff's attention, which prompted the initiation of this discussion. The desire would be to have a 16-foot maximum sidewall height so a 14-foot door could be installed. This proposed amendment would only be applicable to the RG district. The stated purpose of the residential garage district allows for the construction of a residential garage on a lot that does not contain a residential dwelling unit and therefore becomes the primary structure. The permitted use for the residential garage district is as stated in section 212302, which I'll pull up there. And then to protect the nature of the residential district, the current requirements of the residential garage district would remain the same unless otherwise discussed. So, and Dennis, if you want to add anything to that, you go ahead. Otherwise, if you guys have questions.
Yeah, I came in and visited, spent some time talking, it's been a couple of weeks ago now, I suppose. But I think we made a good step when we went to the R2 district for garages. You know, people can have garages to put their things away in. The one thing I believe that we're definitely short on is that we don't allow them to get the kind of things in there that need to be in there. Most all of your bigger pieces of equipment, even some of your pontoons and things, but all of your campers, most all of your campers are going to have a 14-foot door to get them in. And that's been a concern around town. All these things are sitting outside, but we won't let them build anything big enough to put them in. So they have to rent them from someone else. So the 16-foot sidewall would certainly help that, and I think if it's done upright, like we've talked in the past, Pat and you and I have had a lot of conversation about that too. So after visiting with Brandy, she said that she would take a look at it, talk to the staff and talk to the mayor and see if there was an interest in bringing it forward, and evidently there was, and I'm real happy that there was. So now it's up to us, I guess, to decide what we want to do with it. So
Brandy, do you know offhand how many garage districts have we implemented since this ordinance came out? Do you remember? One, Hested's over on Antelope Lane.
I think there's two of them over there, one to the
North
south
Lake
and one to the north.
Anywhere else other than that? You know, we knew these were going to be unique as to wherever they were put in.
I don't think it's officially moved anymore.
North Lake Drive, there's been some rezones for RG.
And that's about it. You know, we kind of always envisioned them to be on the fringe of some of these developments where people are close to their house, a couple blocks, 3 blocks away, kind of some of the lower line land, the less valuable land that they would use them. This is kind of Dennis's wheelhouse as a builder over most of the rest of us. In the RG district, they have to be built with building materials, Ken, that conform to that neighborhood.
Correct.
You know, Dennis, when we talked about it, we talked about the different aesthetic things that can be done on these to make them look good. Do we have any stop losses in the ordinance that prevents them from just being a square building with no overhang? Or does that happen when they come to us?
I don't.
Permitting?
At this point, I don't think we do. We've talked about maybe we should, but I don't believe we have at this time.
So that's what I was thinking about too. And I looked into some other communities that have, sidewall articulation stipulations in theirs for sidewalls that are of a certain length. You know, it has to have a jog in it.
And that's specifically what Dennis had talked about. You know, I go back to some of the bigger ones that we've allowed where we've, at the time of permitting, we've requested wainscot, we've requested shingles, kind of things like that. I agree that I think the sidewall heights are an issue, and I think there's ways with overhangs and windows and dormers and jogs and walls and things like that that can make them look not so boxy, not so, gymnasium in the north part of town kind of look. But do we need to put something in the ordinance in that route, or?
I think we should. I could foresee some of these garage districts that might pop up being planned and zoned that way down the road would be across the street from a nice residential area.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want a pole shed going up. Of course, you wouldn't in the city have a pole shed anyway, probably, but
No, but to that degree, then maybe you don't automatically want to put 16 feet. Maybe you want to put a 12 to 16 feet, depending on zoning, you know. The 16 feet out the lake looks great. I mean,
Yeah.
like you said, they're behind a shelter belt, nobody sees them.
If
they're
it's
not
behind a
really
shelter
adjacent.
belt, recessed down
You know,
4
but
feet
if
below the
Dakota
road, it's
Commons
one thing.
decides they want to take a block out there and throw them in there, and all of a sudden you got 16-foot sidewalls over there, it could look out of place without the proper screening and stuff like that. I'm not saying it would, but those should be some kind of considerations that you guys can look at it at the time you're doing it and say, yeah, we'll allow this with this or without this or whatever. So instead of just making, okay, once you pass, you can automatically do whatever you want to do.
and I think with
I know that's tough to do, and I'm generally the other guy on the other side of that coin that says, no, I want something black and white that once you're done with it, I can say yes or no to them.
Okay, I just perused through the RGIS, and as of right now, the only RG districts that I can find are along the west side of the lake. There's 2 distinct ones that were done over there. I wasn't here when the RG concept was developed and implemented here, but one thing that I would kind of think of is that we always talk about having an adequate buffer between the various zonings, you know, like not having the R1 next to a C3, for instance, or C1. Maybe we also want to at least think about the applicability of an RG as part of that buffer zone between a residential and a commercial use, because obviously the only place out by the lake isn't the only place that an RG is probably going to be needed. So, you know, if you think about that as maybe one of the options of a transition from residential to other uses, that might fit.
Yeah, because I mean,
Yes.
when the concept came, that's kind of what we had thought is, you know, instead of going R1, R2, R3 commercial, it was you could go R1, R2, RG, you know, as you work your way outside those developments. That's where
Yeah.
I'm surprised that we haven't had more pop up, to be honest. And maybe the 10-foot sidewall is a big enough limitation in there that it's preventing some of that development from happening too.
Well, a 16-foot excuse me, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
A 16-foot sidewall isn't going to seem that tall. A 16-foot sidewall looks like a big, tall, rectangular box if you build it to look like that, with a 1-foot overhang and so forth. I mean, that's exactly what it's going to look
This
like.
was-
But if you break it up with all the things that Blake talked about a minute ago, it won't look like a 16. It won't look out of place
That's why I
at
wonder if
all.
we couldn't put some generic language in there, you know, where we say, you know, sidewalls over 10 foot, you know, are constructed in a manner where it breaks that vertical plane. You know,
Yeah.
whatever method you use, because there's many methods.
Yeah.
This was an example of what a 16-foot sidewall would be. And granted, this is in the industrial zoning and it's done nice. But although residential, the RG district, it would have to resemble the building materials of the house more. Also with the RG district, there's the size limit, or you need so much frontage and like an acre, over an acre. So they won't necessarily be able to pop up as easy in a residential district. Just a point.
You know, one thing for the record on that RG district too, when we put that in, we said 100% sign off from certain neighbors and 50%. Those were numbers we just threw out because we thought that there's going to be times when one person owns a significant more than others, and the 100% was something we wanted to start with. That was kind of a moving target once we saw how these were put in there. But I like the idea of allowing them to go taller, and like Dennis and Blake said, if we can come up with some sort of a box to put them in, maybe the taller your sidewall goes, the more aesthetic things you're required to do in there.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to see some language in there addressing the vertical height and then also, you know, long sidewalls too.
Because when you look at it, we're talking about a 16-foot sidewall. You could put what, Ken, a 26-foot sidewall on a house? Two-story house is how tall sidewall?
35 foot to the peak, so.
Yeah, 32 to the peak, or 35?
35 to the peak.
35 to the peak minus what your pitch is. You could be 30 foot on a house, you know, so a 16-foot sidewall on an outbuilding doesn't look that big compared to a two-story house across the street.
The thing about houses, they tend to have a lot more jobs and architectural features than just a box.
Yeah, so for
I think the 100% might be a little difficult too, because if you could have a nice planned area, but all you gotta have is one person that's opposed to it, and he can shut the whole thing down.
And I know the discussion from the board when we put that was it would be nice to get 100%, but we realize that you're not always going to get 100%, and that would allow for the board to make that concession. I just wanted to bring it up again so it was still in the public record that 100% wasn't a stone. It was just a starting place for us to see, because we weren't sure how this was going to evolve.
I have one other question too, Brandy, and on the second page there under the structure, item F, I know why that was put in there, so these don't become buildings have living quarters in. but it's also nice in some of these nicer buildings, like we're expecting to be able to have a bathroom. And if the sewer's available there, if it's not available, it's not available, but if it is adjacent to the city sewer, I think it'd be nice to be able to let them have a bathroom in there. And then you'd have to be hooked up to sewer to do it. I don't know what the board would think about that.
I think that'd be just fine.
You know, the living quarter concept of it was always a fire department issue too, and you didn't want, they weren't designed to be rentals, you know, but.
And we're not turning them into living quarters, not turning them into rentals or anything else, but.
Ken, if I have
Many people like to go in the garage and do all kinds of things now, but it's certainly nice to have a bathroom in there.
Ken, in a detached garage on the same premises as your home, can you have a bathroom in there now?
Yes.
We never used to allow it though.
No, but you know, a lot of people at the lake and a lot of hunters and fishermen and everything else, you're just not allowed to have a kitchen or a sleeping area, but you're allowed to have a bathroom.
But yeah, and that's evolved where we've allowed in a detached structure on premises, we've allowed for bathrooms to go in there.
Correct.
But not living sleeping quarters
Or kitchens, yep.
or kitchens. So this kind of goes along with that if you were going to needed to put a bathroom in there, you put a bathroom in there. I agree with you
I
on
would
that.
agree with you, Dennis. I think that that's something that could easily be done. And like you say, you're out working in your garage all day long, you're building a car or something, and you know, you're across the way and you're kind of grubby looking by now, and you'd like to have a bathroom of your own.
You
I
could be
like the
5
idea.
blocks from your house.
Yeah, easily. I like the idea.
Did you want us to look at that percentage then? Are you looking at 90 or 80?
Percentage on, Dennis, what do you think a percentage on the sign off? No, we really haven't run into an issue with it.
Number would
but-
be, but, what do we require? And on 250 feet, it's 50%, right? I don't know whether 50% or 75%. All I'm saying is if you have one person that can be a little hard to get along with in your neighborhood, he can stop the whole thing, and I would hate to see that always happen. So
I
don't
agree
know.
with that. That puts an awful lot of power in one
Well,
person's
person-
hand.
Yeah, one person has a tremendous amount of power.
You know, if one
You
person
could have
owns
a whole series
50% of it,
neighbors
then it's
that are,
different.
Oh, definitely in favor of this project. You got one guy.
Well,
It
it's-
doesn't matter.
If that one
75.
person owns a 50-foot lot, but if that one person owns 500 feet adjacent, it's different. But
The 100% is for the immediately adjacent property owners.
Adjacent.
And then the 50% is for the property owners within 250 feet of the zoning. So you'd
Mhm.
have to get, both your immediate neighbors.
Well, so if just say it's a lot that's stuck in the middle there and you got 4 neighbors on the side, if you go to 75%, then one guy can abstain and you can still make it through there.
Mhm.
So if you say 80%, then you've included them all anyway. You're gonna have to go down to at least 75.
Okay, let's look at this. If you are requiring the parcel of ground to be 1 acre,
More than likely, you're gonna have more than 4 property owners anyway, but I'm
yeah, but
getting
if
to the
it's gonna be 1
smallest.
acre and you're gonna require so many frontage feet,
Yep.
depending on how deep you go, but how many potential neighbors could you have? So wouldn't be too many.
Wouldn't be too many, but
Yeah.
more than likely it'd be more than 4, but I'm just trying to get it to the smallest denomination. Take it out of the thing where one guy can't eliminate it.
You know, and if we tie this tight enough, like Blake was just saying, 50%'s reasonable, because we're gonna set the parameters of what these garages can look like. 50%.
from a precedent standpoint, Justin, if a person doesn't want a road, it's 50%, right? We want to pave if we want to pave a gravel road in town, you have to have a 50% buy-in.
It's 55.
55.
Yeah. It's for special assessments, yeah.
Are there any other precedences that we've set on other property-like things where we're requiring neighbors to buy in, that we should take that into consideration if we modify this?
Not that I'm aware
Can you
of.
think of any other times where one neighbor can stop another neighbor from doing something other than the
Vacation
road?
petitions?
Well, I
Yeah.
was just looking at the 300-foot radius, when we have a moved-in structure, right now that calls for 100%. And it used to be that if they said no, we was screwed, but then we did rewrite it so that they can come back to you guys if we don't get 100% and you can override it.
And I think that's what we used when we did this, is we set 100 because we didn't know how this would evolve, but the board always has the opportunity to override that.
one thing, I mean, the RG, if I recall, also requires a 300-foot frontage, so we're not doing it on a lot-by-lot basis. And that potentially could throw more than 4 neighbors into a discussion or not, depending on how it aligns with the adjacent properties. But I do know that the 300-foot right-of-way frontage is also one of the limitations of an RG district.
One thing I would add from a legal perspective, just in terms of consistency, regardless of what you decide to do, policy-wise, with regard to the sanitary sewer issue, we define accessory use, residential dwelling for accessory use purposes elsewhere in our zoning ordinances as referring to sleeping and eating or preparation of food. There isn't a reference made to plumbing or bathroom, bathing facilities per se. So for consistency purposes, there's a strong argument to be made there that sanitary sewer isn't
My
be a novel
interpretation,
concern.
yeah, my interpretation of the meaning for them not to allow sanitary sewer specifically, because I mean it doesn't refer to water, utilities, and et cetera, is that there may have been a concern that somebody would put an RV in one of these RG structures and attempt to live in that. So you may have to refine some type of oversight. I mean, make that RV restriction for plumbing in accordance with the same thing of your living quarters type thing or food preparation. But
Yeah, and
it's just something to think about. I'm not saying that's what it is.
Well, and I think, because that garage in the residential garage district would still constitute an accessory structure,
Right.
that provision would still apply. And I would say that RV, there'd be a good case to bring against whomever's living in that RV that they shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, but we've already outlined that part. It says, prohibited uses is residential dwelling uses, living quarters. So it's already spelled out in what we've had to this point anyway, so.
Jason just brought up a good question, something I think we need to think about, but I'll let you say it. But this would be a real consideration, 'cause I think you'd see people like to do this.
Where they could put sewer in their garages so they can dump their campers out when they get off vacation and fill them back up with water and so forth and get the tanks going, get them cleaned out and back on the road they go again the following weekend. So it'd be more a convenient thing if they had, sewer in their garages or were able to do that.
Keeps them from putting in their front yard for 2 days. And that's what we were trying to get away from.
Or the
And we've handcuffed ourselves by not building the buildings big enough to allow them to get the RVs out of their front yard. Yeah, there's a lot of people that they'll stage them in their front yard for 2 or 3 days while they load them and water them up and all of that.
Yeah.
What was that show, National Christmas something Lampoon with Eddie?
yeah, dumping it in the storm sewer.
I think what we'd want, Brandy, is if we can, the idea would be is, yeah, I think we can go to we're in agreement that a higher sidewall is something we probably want to take a look at, but we need some modifications to the height and length of those sidewalls as to aesthetically how we want them to look. Plumbing in their bathroom, plumbed in there, I don't think anyone has any issues with that. And
Sounds good. So
if you can bring something back to us at the next
What about the
meeting.
percentage?
I'm leaning more to a 75. Jason mentioned, well, should it be 50? And it's like, well, when you zone a garage district, you've stopped the development of residential from that point. If you've got a 4-block area that's all R1 and somebody comes in and says, I want to switch it to garage district, you no longer are going to have any more R1 development. That's the buffer Shane talked about. So it's pretty significant when when we wrote the ordinance, we said 300 feet frontage. We didn't mean 300 feet total when you add both sides of the road, like over here. They front both sides of a road. They front North Lake Drive and Antelope Lane. Well, now we're adding 300. they could have 150 feet on each side of the lot, and we're calling it 300. The intent was 300 front feet on one side of the road. But the last couple times it's been interpreted differently than it was intended. But it happens to be in an area where it doesn't really matter. It makes sense to allow that development there anyway. But, you know, if this was a large housing development, and you put an RG district right in the center of it, you've stopped the R1 development with 51% of the votes instead of 75, but my thought anyway.
I'm kind of leaning towards 50% that way, so, you know, if there's somebody a couple of doors down, that, so it keeps the minimal of people to be, the people are going to be impacted are your neighbors, not people 2 doors down. They're the ones you're going to have to look at, so that's why I'm kind of leaning towards 50%.
Well, if you're gonna go to something like that, my recommendation is that it slightly exceed 50%, because then there's no tie. I don't want a tie. I'd rather have it 55% like the assessments versus have it be, you know, anything else, because
I like
know,
that. That way it's
if it's
not
5
that
on
makes
5
sense.
in basketball,
half
it's
of
an
them for
even
and
game.
half
If
of 'em
it's
against it, yeah.
6 on 4, it's different, right? So, okay.
55%. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if the assessments are at 55, it makes sense.
Any other questions,
Well,
Brandy, as far
we're
as what we
wiring
think we're
it in
thinking?
such a way it's gonna look good anyway. We're requiring that before they're gonna be allowed to build it.
And we
so.
still have the, do we not, we still have the, when it comes to us to say we want to do this as an RG, we still have to say it's appropriate, or not appropriate for that land use. It's still a land use, you know, planning and zoning is land use. We could look and go, no, RG's not appropriate that close to the center of development. It needs to be somewhere else, even if they have the signatures and everything's there. We could say that it's not appropriate for that development there anyway, so. Let's do 55 and see how it works. See what kind of response we get. And there's a
Sounds
couple
good.
guys on the city council that help wordsmith that. We'll find out what they think too.
And then as far as the language of the aesthetics of the building, do we just want to have it in there that Ken will approve to make sure it's appropriate? And I don't know if we'd want to get more strict than that. As far as doing different roof lines and stuff, like you had kind of talked about, Blake.
There are some other communities, I was Googling it, you know, on sidewall articulation, and I want to say it was Eden Prairie, somewhere over in Minnesota had some language in there that made a lot of sense.
Good job.
Minimum jobs. So we can look at some of the other communities.
What language did we fit on the finishes for the Gateway District? Ken, that kind of came back to a group, right? That I would think we'd use a similar track maybe for that.
Yeah, in the Gateway District, we had certain, you know, we had colors, we had certain building designs that could be used out there, and since we had different businesses come out there with certain colors, we had to bring that in front of the council to get approval. But then the council actually turned that and said to Ken, you know, we appreciate the work you're doing on it. You can, you know, we understand that some of these colors have to be different, so we kind of threw that back on his plate, and he has that authority for us.
Do we have language in there that comply with the neighborhood? Anything of that type of language that we could use? Okay. Sounds good. If you send it out to us, then even if you want to send it in an email, we can fire some ideas back to you before you put it in ink.
Sounds good.
Any other questions on it? It was just for discussion. Is item number 6, no executive session. I need a motion to adjourn. Motion by
Say,
Mr.
if
Dolly,
I may-
second by Mr. Stein. All in favor, say, go ahead.
Can I say
Yep,
just one thing?
bet.
Monday night, just if any of you are wanting to, we are going to have open discussions about different ideas for Lake Compesca. This will be handled by Roger Foote out to the Upper Big Sioux offices. That's at the zoo. There's going to be discussion about marinas. There's going to be discussion about dredging and just what can we do for Lake Compesca. So there's going to be open discussion. If any of you on the Planning Commission want to be there, you're sure welcome. And the public is open for that.
What time and where?
Starts at 7 o'clock out to the Upper Big Sioux offices, which is at the zoo.
All right, thank you. Have a motion, a second to adjourn. All in favor say aye. Opposed, motion carries.